Hello, friends. Today's episode is with the amazing Ada Chen. Ada and I actually met in a networking group that we are both a part of. We did a very quick hot seat networking experience where you get to talk for like 5 minutes. And it was such a joy to meet her. We hit it off almost immediately. I will tell you, for anybody that has ever done any speed networking, it was a really difficult thing for me who loves to connect with people because you fade into this conversation and you're like, oh, hi. And then as you're talking, you slowly fade to black, which was such an emotional roller coaster to me. But the beauty of this was that Ada and I were like, hold on, I see you. We need to keep talking. And on the other side of that 5 minutes, we set up a couple different check-ins and we got to know each other. And I was immediately like, you need to come on my podcast. I think even in that 5 minutes, I was like, your story, you, everything about you, you need to be on the podcast. And so I'm so excited that you get a chance to meet her today. She is the founder and CEO of Chuan's Promise, which we talk about at length in here. It's a natural skincare line focused on sustainability and inclusivity. Ada talks a lot about her journey to becoming the founder of this natural skincare company and all of the twists and the turns that 2019 until now have brought into her life to bring you some amazing skincare into the world. But also we talk about so much of her story and how it has impacted how she shows up in this world, how she creates space for other people, how she's doing her work as a catalyst for conversation, change, and an invitation for self-care for many of us who don't necessarily feel like we have the time and space to be able to prioritize that. And then towards the end of this episode, Ada is so generous in talking about her podcast that she has created and how the 2021 spa shootings in Atlanta were a big catalyst for this podcast coming to be. So since you are a podcast lover that you're listening here now, I hope that you stick around and listen for that incredible story that you'll hear me in it talk about how I had chills go through my entire body as I listened to the origin story and people just really coming together to create community and a space for healing, but also to amplify one another's voices and hold space to foster conversations that are so incredibly necessary and needed. So without further ado, I am so excited to introduce you to my friend Ada. Ada, welcome to Checkbox Other. I am so freaking happy that you're here right now.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, see, I'm like rubbing my hands together. I'm amped for this conversation. I'm just going to get it started because I know we'll have a lot of stuff to talk about. So I start with everybody. A Cliff Notes version of your journey, the twists, the turns, the aha moments, the things that led you to who you are and how you're showing up in the world today. We'd love to hear what that Cliff Notes version looks and sounds like and feels like to you today.
Yeah. Oh, I'll try to keep it Cliff Notes, but I tend to get carried away on this one.
That's okay.
My name's Ada Chen. I am second generation Taiwanese American, so born and raised in New Jersey, grew up on the East Coast, moved to California for a bit, worked in finance tech, and now have my own D2C e-commerce natural skincare line. So third career already, lots of twists in there, and now live in Denver, Colorado.
Oh,
so neither coast.
Yeah, but very, very powerful place to be. I think there's a lot of people that have been attracted, especially to Denver in the last few years. So a hub for sure. That was Cliff Notes. That was so good. I don't think anybody has gone that quick. That was beautiful. It's like you've done
said Cliff Notes.
I mean, I'm impressed. I'm very, very impressed. All right. Well, because we have a lot of things I wanted to talk about. She's like, all right, I know how to manage this stuff. All right. So I always ask people about a time in their life where they have felt other, different, or as though they didn't belong, and how that's kind of informed your view on the world, how you show up, and if it impacts the work that you do.
Oh, it so impacts the work that I do. Probably a lot of the things that I've done. And I'm like, I was thinking about it, like, when was the first time that this really happened? And it was definitely, so I actually went to 2 high schools and 2 colleges. So 1 year at the first one and 3 years at the other one, and got my degree at the second one. And that happened, that was like a repeat it twice. I didn't get enough. And so the first high school that I went to was in the town that I grew up in, which is Edison, New Jersey. And if you know anything about Edison, New Jersey, it actually experienced a lot of white flight over the last 30 years. So it used to be where the Ford manufacturing plant is, and now that no longer exists, that hasn't been there for a while. It's now like a commuter town into New York City. It is a fairly heavily Asian suburb of New Jersey right now. But when I started in kindergarten, you could probably in the public school count me and my other family friend, and we were the two Asians, and then everybody else was some flavor of white. And by the time I hit high school, it was very, very different. Like I had a freshman English class that was all East or South Asian, except for one kid and the teacher. So like wild amounts of change there. But growing up, you don't really kind of process that. And so for
Yeah.
me, being in that environment, like I never realized that I was other and that the majority of the world did not look like me
Mm.
until I moved after that freshman year. And we moved to Princeton, which is home of a PWI, Princeton University, Ivy covered stuff. Like for sure, the literal public high school has Ivy on it. Like I cannot make this up. It looks like a Gothic castle. And that was a very different, environment to be in where I was like, whoa. Like
Hello.
you see a lot about like the lunchbox moment, and like I had some of those moments actually, to be fair, before I'd moved there, but like that was when I moved, and it was like that's weird, and that smells weird, and you're weird, and I don't like that, and why are you watching that? That's weird. Like why do you have to go to school again on a Sunday? Like for all these different reasons. And so that was probably the first time when I was like 14
Mm.
and in that new environment being like, oh, got it.
Oh, hi. Hello.
Hi.
This is part of how we operate in life. Okay. And we don't really talk about it either. Okay.
No.
All right. So at 14, when there's a couple other things going on where you're trying to figure out yourself.
A couple, just a couple.
Yeah, that must have been such an interesting experience of, I mean, the fascinating part as I'm hearing you talk about this is that you were living demographic change in the first 14 years. Like you're actually watching that change happen and be like, okay, I guess this is just what happens. No big deal. This is where I live. I'm going to the same place every day. New people are showing up and more people may or may not be looking like me. Having these lunchbox moments isn't part of it because everybody's kind of showing up with their own thing. And then having that like record scratch kind of feels like a little bit
Oh
of that of
yeah.
like, whoa, hold on. This place does not allow for anybody to be different.
It was like reverse culture shock. And I like
Mm.
to tell you how close these places are, it's like a 45-minute drive between the two places.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's so fascinating because, uh, as you said, lunchbox moment, for anybody that doesn't know what that means, do you want to give your take on it? I have a story to go along with it. So I'll add another part of what lunchbox moment means.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's come up a lot probably in the last 5 to 10 years, but essentially it's the idea of like when you're a kid or even an adult and you bring your lunch to work and maybe you're microwaving it or you're eating it and your food may not be something that someone else is familiar with, and their immediate reaction is to go, ew, that's disgusting. Like, what is that, worms instead of noodles? Um, and like, here's the thing. I remember it happening as a kid and in high school, but I've also experienced it in the actual workplace as an adult.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what? It's food.
Yeah.
Like, leave me alone. Leave me and my lunch alone. I'm gonna go like.
And the part to me is just like, we live in a country where like on a stretch of, I'll just say in a strip mall, and I know not every place has a strip mall, you likely can find a nice aggregation of many different types of food that smell many different types of ways. And still, when we're in school settings and work settings, there is this expectation that we all just become a prototype of I'll say bland monotony. That's what I'll say. That's going to be my back pocket. And the reason I'm sharing this is I was on a train back home to Connecticut from New York City. So like, again, New York City, so many different people eating so many different things, having so much of a different background and preference. And that's, the way you grew up right outside the city, right? I was on the train and there was this, I'll call him a boy. I always feel weird when I'm calling somebody that's in their like 20s a boy, because I mean I'm but he was young. He was like he came on the train and he was like he was a sophomore in college, I found out later, but was like very much like eager, almost missed the train, ran for the 30 minutes that he was in New York City to run from Penn Station to the Empire State Building and back. Like that's where I'm like, that takes some boyish energy to have the stamina to do that and willingness to do that. And also this boy came and was sitting next to me for hours, got up and got food for himself or had food for himself and warmed it up, came back and sat down next to me. And I'm sitting there doing work, again, bland way of existing myself. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And all of a sudden he sits down and I could smell this food and it like awakened every sense in my body. And I like clocked it and he went, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I just said to him, I'm like,
No.
oh no. I go, I'm so sorry if my reaction communicated anything other than sheer jealousy and excitement with the fact that there is such beautiful smell and flavor coming from the person sitting next to me. And he's like, oh. And I was like, yeah. And I go, I know, because and then he starts telling me his story. He's from Nigeria, moved here 2 years ago to Norwich, Vermont to go to college. And so
Oh,
his
Lord.
experience, right? And I was like, oh, and he goes, yeah, I came in within the first few weeks, there was like 7 inches of snow. First time I ever saw snow. I was like, oh my God, again, culture shock, right? And it was such a vulnerable moment for him to be. Again, he's probably like 20, 21. So an adult having this lunchbox moment with somebody on the train. And I was like, oh, and the younger versions of myself that I was also being like, no, please feel the biggest embrace of hug that I wish you could have, that I could pour back to myself, that we could have in anybody listening to this conversation that's experienced that, because it is so counterintuitive and so exclusive
Yeah.
that it's just like you actually have to actively try to make people feel like shit to do that. And it's fascinating because he's talking to me and he's like, so what kind of food do you like? And I was like, would you like me to talk to you for 5 hours about this? But I said to him, like, in the shortest sense possible, I like food with flavor. And
Yeah.
I said, and he was just like, oh, and I started explaining to him the different types of food. And he was just like, okay. And I said, what kind of food do you like? And he starts explaining. He goes, I think my answer is food with flavor too. And I said, it's fascinating because what the baseline of the reason we say that is that ew, that's gross, is the food that lacks flavor, is the food
Yeah.
that lacks sensory response. And so it's so conditioned in us to be like afraid of that, when at the same time, I mean, all of my senses, I like called home and I was like, where are we stopping on the way? Like, I need a Jamaican patty. I need rice and beans. Can we get some Chinese food tonight? Can we get, like, I need everything. He hit like everything. I didn't even know what food he was eating. Honestly, I didn't even ask. I was just like, I'm drooling and I don't want to drool into your food. And so
Yeah.
it's a fascinating juxtaposition when we know what it is to have that, like, my nourishment isn't allowed here. And also having our bodies be like, wait, no, but I want that. I need that. This is what brings vibrancy to life. So thank you for sharing that. I now want to ask you a question that I just started folding in recently. And it's, when was the first time that you remember in your life, or a time that you remember in your life, where you felt like fully seen for who you were, that, you know, the world around you was like, hey, oh, here you go, here you are. What was that, or a moment that was like that for you?
Oh, probably pretty soon after that move. I was lucky enough. Somehow we scrounged together the money and I got into this program to go back to Taiwan to teach English. As part of this, like, overseas, our citizens have left and gone to other places, had children there, like, but we want them to still have a tie back
Yeah.
to home. It's kind of like the Ministry of Cultural Affairs in Taiwan was having this, like, let's copy Birthright, but like kind of
Our
not
way.
really. Yeah, our
Yeah.
way. And they had a number of programs, and I did not do the one that is the most famous, that had a whole documentary about it and doesn't exist anymore, which was purely, like, literally meant to set people to find a significant other. I didn't do
No
that one.
way.
I did the ugly stepchild of that program, or stepsister, whatever.
Yeah. That's right.
And it was called AID. I don't remember what it stood for, but essentially we went back for the whole summer to teach English. But it was all people who were like me, who had parents who had come over, who had either met and married in the States or in Canada or the UK or Australia, like all the English speaking countries, they got us all together. And they're like, you are a quote unquote native English speaker. You should be able to then teach our children in these elementary schools how to do English. It'll be a whole cultural exchange thing. And like, now you'll love the country. And I mean, it worked. Like it definitely brought me closer to, understanding Taiwan and like where my parents came from and kind of all of the growth that had happened there.
Yeah.
But also it was the first time where I was like literally immersed with a couple hundred kids. We were all kids, high school and college, who had similar experiences to me all over the country. And there's still some people today, like the friend who officiated my wedding is someone I met through that program. And there's still people that I know that I keep in touch with today that are from there or who know somebody else who did that program. And that was probably like the first opportunity where I was like, I can be fully at ease because I don't have to context switch and I don't have to explain things and you kind of already just get it. Or like you had a slightly different experience, like let's talk about that because you're saying you're jealous of my experience, but I like completely don't even understand what it means to grow up in the Midwest or Oklahoma and like be the only person around. Like let's talk about it because there's like some different stuff going on here. And so yeah, that was, I don't think that's what they set out to do that with that program, but hey.
Hey, that's beautiful. I mean, it's so funny. The last interview we did was with a woman named Andrea, and she was talking about going to a DEI summer camp in her high school years. Like, had never heard of it before. They came to school. She's like, yeah, I'll do that. And was talking about how that experience gave her first experience of feeling like it was safe to be herself. And it's really fascinating because one of the pieces that she talked about was like, what is it about that age group? Like, what is it about being like hormonal, but still early in that situation that allows you to find yourself and find others and be able to have those difficult conversations that as adults, we're having a real hard time creating any kind of space or place for, even if you're eagerly saying, yeah, I want to do this. How do you actually say the things that are like, I'm jealous, that's not the way it is for me, that's not working, how do I handle my emotions in this journey to belonging? So that's incredibly powerful. All right, so how see now I want to know more. What was it like to kind of become a language teacher? Was that something that you knew you were going to be doing, or was that just like, you know how to speak English, you can teach it, go ahead?
Yeah, you sign up, it was an application, like you had to actually get into this program and, good on them that they made everything was free except for you had to get yourself there. So you had to pay for your plane ticket.
Yeah.
And, they put us through this boot camp basically for the first 4 weeks where they locked us up in the youth training center, which is it's like essentially like a hostel, but not really. Like it's a government owned hostel. And at the time I think it was swine flu, avian flu, something was going around. And because we were all coming in from outside of the country, and like Taiwan's an island the size of New Jersey, they got real serious. They were like, you are all, it was not COVID level lockdown, but it was like, you cannot leave the grounds of this like building. So you have your dorm where there's like 3 to 4 people in a dorm. You have the cafeteria and then you have a classroom. And every day from like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. you're going to be in the classroom learning how to teach and like building lesson plans with the people you're going to teach with. And here's approximately the ages you're going to be working with and all these different things. So they kind of tried to give us some sort of structure, but like in essence, when we got dropped in our different towns, which they tried to send us to all these places that weren't the big city, right? So like they're really trying to get you out there like into the middle of the country, but there's still a 7-Eleven because there has to be. And their 7-Eleven's like different. It's not like 7-Eleven America where you're like, that's kind of gross, I don't want to go into the gas station 7-Eleven. It's 7-Eleven's like the hub. Like you can mail stuff there, you can get the things renewed there, pay your bills, all the stuff, and then also buy food. So we were in a town with one 7-Eleven, and we're like out there and we basically became glorified camp counselors. And so you kind of learn a little, and it wasn't until much later that I kind of reflected on, oh, like they were trying to teach us about scaffolding and like these concepts about education that would have been helpful to know as a student.
Right. Yeah.
But you're 17, kind of just like, ooh, fun.
Figuring it out. Yeah. You're
Yeah.
like, yeah, I learned something. I don't know what to call it nor what it's going to do next, but it'll come back later, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I love, gosh, there's so many parts of this. I think there's the shedding of ego that happens in not knowing a place. There is the ability to connect with people in that kind of incubator style experience that you were in. And then really the vulnerability of being like, hi, everyone. How are you? I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing, but we're going to do this together. And it's such a beautiful way to connect with people that you have differences with. So anyway, I'm here for you said AID. I'm here. AID. That's very cool. There's a part of me now. I don't know what the first documentary you talked about was, but I would watch both that one and the second one. It sounds like a matchmaking documentary. Is that what I heard?
There was a sister program called Love Boat, and that I can't even make it up. There's a documentary on it. It was actually quite a good film. I did really enjoy it as somebody who went to the sister program.
Yeah.
And knows people who went to that actual program. But Love Boat, I think, ended in the 2010s because of that one was purely like a party time. Like there was no volunteering or teaching or learning how to teach. It was just, we're going to take you into cultural immersion, and that was apparently too much.
Well, I have written it down. It will be in the show notes. I am going to watch this because I love a good documentary, so I'm here for it. Okay, so you talked about this experience of pre-pandemic experience of like, okay, there's something out there. We've got to kind of hunker ourselves down and shut ourselves off in the world. I know that 2020 March brought a lot of different changes for us as a collective humanity. And for you individually, there were a couple changes that happened. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what was going on in your life and some of the decisions that you were making around, I guess, 2019 into 2020, and then how kind of that COVID push shifted some things around for you?
Yeah, it was, looking back, I'm like, wow, that was a lot. But now you're like, it's fine.
I made it.
I made it.
Yeah.
This is you're like, wow, okay, this is how generational trauma's passed down. I get it. Anyways,
don't mind the tears as I laugh.
this is my coping mechanism. No, 2019, my partner, who I then got married to in 2022, so we'd been together since 2015. In 2019, his job moved from Palo Alto, California to Boulder, Colorado, and he relocated with it. And we had a conversation of like, hey, where's this going? Are we going to stay together? Like, are we life partners? Or are we like peacing out? And so we were like, yeah, no, I think I'm in it for the long run. You're my person, one of my people. And so he moved first, and I had just re-signed my lease, or our lease, to stay in San Francisco for another year. So my lease was ending in April 2020. So basically I had like a year to kind of figure it out. I tried for 9 months to work with my previous employer on, figuring that out. And they basically said, nope, we're not going to support you going remote, even though a whole lot of their products, they were a big software company that makes productivity tools. A whole lot of their products are hyped about remote work. One of the products that they acquired and brought in actually was this whole remote work friendly product and team. But when it push came to shove and you actually asked them to go remote, if you weren't basically a software engineer, they were like, well, you're not valuable enough for us to make this happen. So it was you have to be the exception, not the rule kind of setup. Yeah. Which, if we look at how HR policies and laws and things are set up, when that's discrimination, just saying it, that's how you codify it. And so tried to work with them, tried to get a new role on a different team. I was like, you've given me all these raises and accolades and all these things, and I manage all these things, and you're telling me that you don't want to keep me working for you. I've already told you I'll take a pay cut to move and keep my job and do something else for you. No. I was like, okay. And actually like had multiple people like kind of either sabotage it or do it was all sorts of messed up.
Right.
So by the time that February and March of 2020 was rolling around and I knew that my lease was ending and I needed to get a move on, they were just kind of like, so you're gonna leave? And I was like, yeah, okay, fine, I'm gonna leave. Wrote a whole thing on, my goodbye and peaced out. And my last day was March 31st. But 2 weeks before that, I had actually fled San Francisco because that was the day that the city had shut down. And they were the first city in the US to shut down.
Yeah.
And I knew, I was like, okay, it's mid-March and my lease ends in 3 weeks. So if this thing lasts longer than 3 weeks, I no longer really have any things here, furniture here. It's just me and the dog and like an old IKEA mattress that we're not bringing with us. So pretty much they locked down the city. I got an hour heads up by an ex-coworker friend who somehow knew someone in the mayor's office. I bought like any flight out that I could get on, which was basically meant that I had 3 tickets just to make sure I got on a plane.
Yeah.
Because we didn't know what lockdown meant. We were like, are they going to stop planes? Are they going to like shut the border to California? Who knows?
Yeah.
So freaking out, emptying my apartment, leaving, fleeing. I just like signed off of my Zoom and my Slack at noon and just started chucking things in bags, like hightailed it to the airport.
Wow.
Didn't tell anybody besides my partner and the friend that was going to originally drive me to the airport that I no longer needed a ride. And a few friends that were holding stuff for me, basically, that I couldn't bring with me at that point. That I was leaving. And then I got to the airport, I called my dad and I was like, I'll be back when this is done. I just can't wait in that apartment because who knows. Got on the plane, landed in Denver, ended up being okay for like the last 2 weeks of work when I was just kind of cruising on Zoom. And the world, slowly started shutting down.
Yeah.
And I got a call at the end of April because at the time my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's when I graduated college. And he got divorced from my mom. And so he had actually followed me out to California. We had some extended family there. They were helping watch him, but he was still independent. And I got a call one weekend, and it was my cousin who said, hey, we couldn't get in touch with your dad. So we had maintenance go check on him and he was found down. So he's in the hospital. Like, we're like, this is the hospital. You might get a call. Immediately, I get a call from a hospital number. And I'm like giving them his whole medical record because I'm the eldest daughter of immigrant parents, right?
Like, I'm not sure if anyone's heard of this whole eldest daughter thing, but we got it all.
we've got all of it. We have the receipts and we have all of the notes.
All your passwords, all your notes, all of your history. We got you. Yeah.
What is password security when your password is the same 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6?
Please let me change it. No? Okay. All right. Okay.
Well, if you're not gonna let me change it, I will be the recovery email.
Okay. Just want you to know.
Just so you know. So I had all of that because I'd been taking him to the doctor the whole time. And so kind of gave them the download, was like freaking out, like what's happening. They said, we're stabilizing him, we're figuring it out. No one's allowed in a hospital right now. So essentially becoming his caregiver became my full-time job because I was kind of like playing with some ideas and like, trying to resolve my burnout from the past job. But it had only been like 3 or 4 weeks since I'd left. And I was like, well, I'm going to throw myself into the thing so that I can like fix this problem. And that was April 2020 until he passed in January of 2021. So that was like a good 8 or 9 months of my life just on calls, outside of hospitals, being snuck into hospitals when they thought he wasn't gonna make it, outside of windows. Like, it was a wild time. And for anybody who's in healthcare or knows somebody who works in healthcare, like wild for them as well. And so I think it's just looking back, like I said, you're like, cool. But in the moment, it's just completely different.
Like hair on fire, futility, also like, I'm going to do the best I can, but this is like act of God level stuff. That's always written in those contracts. It's like, this is all going to be great, except for this act of God thing. You're like, oh, we're in the middle of that thing that everyone talks about, like it's never going to happen. How do I survive as the human being I am with sanity intact and also advocate for somebody that's vulnerable and also dance through the intricacies of what our healthcare system is. Like, how do I do all those things and do them without planning and knowing this is going to be part of my toolkit that I needed, and then navigating all of the life choices that I just made in order to flee
Yep.
California, but also flee a workplace that very much showed me that they were treating me like crap as much as I tried to give. Like, there's so many things that you're holding at that point. So I can understand that you'd be like, yeah, I made it through. That's my memory. Because, as human beings, there's only so much we can handle. And I just want to take a minute. I feel like I want to like come through the screen and give you a big, I mean, there's a version of this that like many people wouldn't be able to speak out loud. And so there's a testament in you just sharing this that shows me the level of processing that you've done and intentionality that you went through this process with, that while in that time it might not have felt that way, there's just a huge amount of fortitude that is so very obvious in between the lines of the things you're saying. And so I just want to hold and honor that. I know that process has had you looking at your life and the world in a different way and how you kind of want to spend your time. I want to honor that version of yourself that was like 3 weeks out of a burnout driven lifestyle that you were in, trying to then be like, cool. Yeah, I got 3 weeks of rest. Don't worry about this twitch on my face right now. I'm trying to handle this. Like that. Now we're in a space where that reflection gives you a little bit more hindsight. Can you talk just a little bit about, since that period of time, knowing that many of these things are still with us, right? That whole idea of passed down trauma, but also human beings that still remember things in our bodies. How have you chosen to kind of spend your time and energy in life now with all that you have learned in the last couple of years, and then all the other things we bring with us in our metaphorical backpack of life experiences?
Just like add another one in.
I know, right? There's a new pouch in my backpack I didn't know, right? Yeah.
I mean, that whole experience basically changed my kind of whole outlook on everything. I don't think it changed me fundamentally as a person. I think it helped me hone in a little bit more on like what I cared about and what mattered and what I do want to be spending my time on. Because you're right, I was like fresh out of a burnt out job, and leaving that job, I had thought like, I'll probably do something on my own, figure it out. Like, I'm very entrepreneurial. I was like, I always wanted to start my own thing, but I didn't know what I was going to do. That was, the biggest, longest tech jobs that I had. I was at startups before, which are also very burnout driven.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, like I could be a software founder. Like, that's fine. Like, that's a very neat box. I know what that is. I know what that requires. And I was like, but I don't really like this. Don't really care for it. Have no meaningful ideas that I want to see in the world there.
Yeah.
And kind of the whole process of the being in the depths, I think, of managing my dad's care, I really just stopped taking care of myself. So I'm usually like, exercise helps me physically and mentally. So that's a huge priority for me. Stop doing any of that.
Yeah.
I stopped going outside even, when people were taking their dogs on 50 walks a day, I was just like, I just want to be inside in a hole.
Yeah.
I really like drank a lot of red wine
Mhm.
and didn't eat enough fruit and vegetables, and kind of just was like living it up. Like, I'm just doing what I needed to survive at the moment,
Yes.
which I think many people end up doing without actually like consciously thinking of it and realizing it. But at some point I kind of hit a point where I was like, no, I can't keep doing this. This is also unsustainable as well.
Mm.
And I started like trying to figure out, the first thing that I had messed up in this process was my skin. And I was like, that's a huge thing that impacts your confidence. Everything I had bought from Target and then sanitized with wipes when we came home or ordered online didn't work.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm just going to go back to the basics and start mixing some things at home that I already knew worked for me before. And we'll see if that works for me again. It did. And I was talking to a friend about it. And this friend was like, well, your previous job was selling things to people on the internet. Granted, it was enterprise software, but you do know how this engine works.
Yeah.
why don't you just try putting it on the internet? And I was like, yeah, why not?
All
Like
right.
right now I don't have the capacity to do a full-time job or do something completely, 40 hours a week or whatever we think of as a stereotypical job. But like I do have the capacity to kind of work on this. And so I was like, okay, I'll put the products online and I'll do it in a way that's genuine to me. So packaged and formulated sustainably and with that kind of mindset and priced at a point where everybody can access it, I hope. Or, bringing good quality stuff to people at a quality and a value that makes sense for them that everyone can afford. Because I've been the poor kid. Like, I've been the broke kid. I've had $20 in my bank account and been like, don't know if we can buy this at Trader Joe's.
Right.
Like, I was like, I don't want to make something that's inaccessible to people. If I'm literally just like making it in my kitchen, like anybody should be able to do this. So I threw it on the internet, chose to borrow my dad's name because the whole theme of taking care of yourself, that was actually like how he used to say goodbye. When I would like go visit him for
Yeah.
dinner to take him out to get bread or whatever, and I would like drive off or he'd drop me off at the BART station, he'd be like, okay, take care, and like do a little old man wave.
Yes.
And he would never actually just say goodbye or bye on the phone. It was just, okay, take care, like, and wave me off. And it's like,
Mhm.
okay. And so like the ethos of that kind of came back full circle. And I was like, I cannot fully take care of him and advocate for him in the situation that he's in
Yeah.
if I don't take care of myself and if I don't, have that kind of awareness around me of where I am and how I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then I realized that that was such a pervasive problem. So I was like, okay, like that's here's the ethos of the brand and of the product. So long story short, I launched a natural skincare brand called Chuan's Promise on Black Friday of 2020.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, it was it was an interesting time to be putting things on the internet. I
Yeah.
don't think I would have continued if within the first week I hadn't gotten an order from somebody who wasn't of like personal connection. And I couldn't figure out how they'd found out or who had sent it to them, but they must have read the story and been like, that's cool. I want to support that. I could get behind that. And so, it started out kind of crafty DIY and in my
Yeah.
basement and kitchen. And now we have a real actual warehouse with a production facility, and
That's so
actual
cool.
packaging. And so we're a real company now. Um, so yeah, it was a very interesting pivot, I think, in my life career story arc
Mhm.
of having that moment of realization or multiple moments of realization.
Yeah. I love I mean, there's so many themes that are coming through. And the one that just like, especially coming out of the last couple of weeks of coaching with my clients lately, so much of the conversation has been around this dance between how do I show up in the way that I'm successful, and also how do I deal with the people pleasing muscle that I have been groomed to build so strong.
Yeah.
And what I love about the arc of your story, as you say it, was that a huge catalyst for this was actually taking care of yourself. So not putting other people first, which didn't mean that was already happening, because very much a lot of your story is caretaking and taking care of people. But there is such I don't know, I feel like I could feel the resonance of that whole idea of the mask on the airplane before helping other people, the whole idea of really trying to find the root of the issue that's a problem for you, and realizing that like by taking care of yourself, it abundantly has the ability to overflow and support other people. It's not, at least I know you and I have talked about this before, it's not normally the teachings that you're getting when you're going to school and learn about business. It's not about
Nope.
like, oh, find the thing about the world that's like making you feel like you're not okay to be here. Look at that, find a way that it can be accessible and supportive and abundant for everybody, and then make it available. It's really about like, how can you monetize, differentiate? How can you undercut your competition? How can it be a really cutthroat, dog eat dog, competitive over everything life? And it's like, well, but like, watch what happens when I'm able to say, okay, let me pause here. I realize that my body's not operating the way I want it. My skin is showing me this. My psyche doesn't feel great. What can I do? And I love the like going back to the basics of like, I see you in a kitchen, just being like, here are a couple of things. Let me just put them on my face, right? I always think of like my father's version of that thing is always like Vaseline. That's the answer. Kind of like in Big Fat Greek Wedding, the
Yep,
Windex is the
the
answer, right?
Windex.
Yeah, it's like, how do you go back to the start and just start simple to then be able to build yourself back up versus, can you hand me a pill from some place that has all of these things I don't know to just numb me out? And so I just love so much that the healing journey of this was about like building blocks foundationally, coming back to yourself and then being like, oh, okay, other people want this, cool. And it being like somebody from I'm going to use like somebody that lives on the internet because we don't, oh, you probably know because you sent it to them, but like coming in and being like, oh, cool, look at this thing you created. Nice to meet you. And yes, I'll have 10, like how that has the ability to be like what that abundant energy has to attract. And I just love so much that not only was that the story of 2020 Black Friday, but now we're years later and you're like, I got a warehouse that does this stuff. I have a brand and I am here talking to you about this. And yeah, there are definitely products. Go on if y'all haven't already, go and check out the website and get yourself something. I think there is a part of this that is just like, I wish there were more conversations about building your life this way versus it being like, here's the Facebook method, or here's the way that you just have to kind of do this 5-step plan that really only works for a particular demographic of our population and really doesn't work for a majority of folks either way, to really honor the intuition and the relationship with yourself that you build in the face of challenges. This is just such
Yes.
a beautiful through line to witness in this arc. So I'm so grateful for you sharing that. I also, as I was writing questions to send to you, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm talking about like toxic workplaces. And also we're talking about like skincare that removes toxicity. It's really like so on the nose of this. But I think as you were even talking about how you thought about building this, it was so focused on being sustainable and inclusive and bringing people together, but also together with each other, sure, but together with themselves. And can you talk a little bit about like how you have thought about that, especially in the beauty skincare lane? There's a lot of people out here doing different types of things. And I think historically it hasn't been necessarily about sustainability or caring for others. It's really been about like, how can I get this the cheapest and everywhere? Can you talk a little bit about what it's been like to create a more sustainable, inclusive product and also making it accessible to people? Because I think that those two things have tended to be like, oh, well, if you want it to be that, it's going to be
Yep.
take your entire, it's like, the whole wallet type energy out of the whole thing. Can you talk a little bit about what that process has been like for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think anybody who starts a business, their founding of the business is informed by their own experience, like life experience as a
Yeah.
person. And so coming into it, I was like, well, I've been the person who literally could not afford, the Revlon lipstick at CVS,
Yeah.
who learned how to like extreme coupon very early to
Yes.
like get some free stuff. All that stuff. I've also been the person who's been lucky enough to be on the opposite end of that and have all the privilege in the world with, a fancy degree and the fancy job and, free kombucha on tap.
Yeah.
Like I've lived both opposite things, which is very, very interesting to kind of compare.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, if I'm building something I want it truly to be for everyone,
Yeah.
because that's the only way that you actually impact change and you push things forward. And so as I was like thinking about the products, and I'm like, I like to call it like granola light. Like I'm a little bit of a hippie kind of like crunchy. Don't like plastic wrap and kind of stuff like that, but
Yeah.
recognize that like there are some things that you cannot swap that for in our current society, and that's just like for ease or convenience or whatever. Not
Yeah.
everyone has the privilege to be like refilling their laundry detergent, at a store or not, and not schlepping it up like a fourth floor walk up.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was like, how do you balance all of these things that like I care about, that I think people actually want, that people want to see the change in, and still give them a really good product and really good value. And what I did some research, generally on the beauty industry before really diving in. And it was like,
Yeah.
the majority of the beauty industry spends the majority of the money that we give them on marketing back to us. They're not spending it on the product itself. And one of the bigger things that I learned when I was in tech was that, like, if you build a good product and people come to it, sure, if it like doesn't do, it's not perfect, people will have its gripes, people will always have their, problems with it. But if it's a good product, people will continue to use it.
Right.
So that was kind of the ethos that I carried. I was like, I need to make a good product that people will continue to use, regardless of what it looks like, which we are working on that. There is a big rebrand coming next year. So very excited about that. But
Hello,
I was
marketer.
like,
How are you?
right. I was like, I want to flip that narrative on its head, because if we're giving these giant beauty conglomerates all of our money,
Yeah.
right, and like of $100, $80 of it is going to market back to me, like, I didn't need to pay that $80. I could have paid 20 for the same product.
Right.
Right. And so I was like, that's super wasteful. And then I found out how many billions, 120 billion units of plastic packaging waste are created by the beauty industry internationally every year. And that's the 2018 stat. So it's probably
No.
worse now.
Yes.
7.9 billion units of hard plastic packaging are created in the US specifically every year for health and beauty items. So like your shampoo bottle, your body wash bottle, things like that, once we create them, they are literally here forever. They're
Yeah.
made from oil. They're contributing to climate change. We were talking right before we hit record about the fires and the smoke. Like, that's only going to get worse. And having spent time, in places with this fire and smoke, I never thought I would live to see the day that it reached that level in New York,
Right. Yeah.
until I saw that it was literally orange in Manhattan. And I was like,
Oh.
what? Oh, like the end times are near? What?
Yeah.
What is happening? And so I was like, okay, this, like, it really comes down to this. Like, we have to actually make a change in how we think about our products as consumers. And like, yes, it's not all on consumers to fix all the problems. Big companies cause the majority of the pollution and the waste. But if we can show them that the demand is there and that we want to see products that look like mine, that are packaged in biodegradable, compostable materials, then they'll actually start to listen and start doing things, right? If it's packaged also in a way that's convenient for you, like it actually fits your lifestyle, so like it's a giant push-up tube,
Yeah.
then you're going to use it. Versus, like, if I give you some completely hippy dippy thing that's going to change the world over there but nobody uses it,
Right.
then what's the point? And so it was like kind of all of these things coming together on all of my background of advocacy work in the AAPI organizations I was in, growing up poor, and then quote unquote making it, and then
Yeah.
figuring out like what I wanted to do with all this time and energy now that I wasn't so focused on climbing the corporate ladder.
Yeah.
That kind of brought it all back together. I was like, oh, I'm not going to save the planet on my own, but if I can convince like all these people out here that we need to make one little change in our routines, and oh, by the way, it has this benefit of like, it has a nice message, and every day for 10 minutes you remember to take care of yourself somehow,
Yeah.
then I think that's like actually something truly worth building and continuing to kind of champion in the world.
Yeah. I love the behavioral component of it too. You're talking about it as like, yeah, big, huge, let's change the world energy, right? It's the and again, a lot of times in my coaching, especially in 2020 summer/fall, there was a lot of this, like, I'm just one person. I need to get everything perfect, or there's nothing I can do. Like this dance between futility and like the ultimate control. And it's like both things are not really true.
Right.
How do you allow yourself to make your decisions in alignment with your values and know that, okay, I can make incremental change, but also witnessing the power that you have as an individual, as part of a collective moving the tide of change. And I think that as you're talking about this, it's not about like, okay, I'm going to magically like annihilate the entire beauty industry by doing this one thing. No, but do I give you options? Do I give you encouragement to join this way of looking at this stuff? And then I love, truly, I think one of the pieces, as we talked about, the kind of element of self-care to it, that's like, it's not just a product to slather and go, it's a process and it's a ritual that you give yourself, and it's a level of just intentionality in your day that, again, I think is something that when we are from burnout culture, when we are in the corporate hustle of it all, ritual is more about like, okay, my phone dings me awake in the morning and the blue screen is keeping me awake at night, and any vibration, even if it's not real, wakes me up in my, the ritual is completely just, what is it to be on call? What is it to be afraid that I'm missing out on something? What is it to be scratching and clawing for whatever's next and hope that I am enough, which is the opposite of intentional self-care, if we're really honest.
Right.
And so I love that you offer it also such a tangible way to do that. Because I think oftentimes when we're talking about self-care, it becomes like, okay, we need manicures, pedicures, or we need to just like magically reinvent ourselves and our relationship with boundaries in 2 seconds. But the ability to have something that's tangible and say, okay, this is the thing, but, and also
Yep.
the rest, and I just literally, as I'm saying this, I see your dad. I have never met your dad, but I feel like I met him today. Being like, take care, like literally that invitation to honor yourself, even if it is for 5 minutes, how powerful that is, because it then is contagious in the most beautiful way.
Because realistically, who has 45 minutes for a bubble bath like once a week? No one.
Yeah.
I mean, if you do, good for you. Like,
Yeah.
I like respect if that's your thing that you want to do, have at it. For me personally, and for most of the people that I know who are working, who have caregiving responsibilities, who have other things to do, who have hobbies, who want to do things outside, that's just not a tangible and actionable
Yeah.
form of self-care.
Yeah.
Whereas if I can tell you like, hey, this clay mask isn't going to solve all your problems and world peace and climate change and all that, but if it gives you that 5 minutes once a week to just stop and like turn off your phone, or just look at cat videos for 5 minutes because that's your
Yeah.
outlet, go for it, because spending that 5 minutes on it will actually make the rest of your day and the rest of your week, it will help you like keep you grounded in something at least, right?
Yeah.
And I can't be out here being like, everybody has the time to do all these things. Like, no one, that's just not realistic or feasible for most people. And so I'm very much like transparency, open book, like let's make it something that works for you, that works for most people, because otherwise there's no other way that we're going to actually do it.
Oh, yep. I'm like, ooh, face mask. And then, I want to go metaphors all day. I'm like, and how many masks do we wear out in the world that we're giving a natural blah? But I'll tone that down for a minute. One of the things that I really wanted to talk to you, because you are here, and I said right before we hopped on, I'm like, oh, you're so prepared and ready for this podcast. You know this stuff. And then I was like, oh, wait, you have a podcast. So you started a podcast in the last few years. Can you talk a little bit about the origin story and what that's offered you? Because at least what I've read about this has been its own version of holding space for care, healing, and really, I think cutting out the bullshit is part of I feel like what we were just talking about as well. Can you talk a little bit about the podcast and how it came to be, and share the magic about the podcast with the world?
Yeah, so the podcast is called the Asian Sewist Collective. Sewist is a made-up word to describe somebody who sews stuff. Could be clothes, could be accessories, could be clothes, could be whatever you want to, as long as you know how to sew or you're trying to learn how to sew. And sewing, because everybody had their pandemic hobby. I could not figure out sourdough bread, and I was clearly not doing my exercise. I did not buy a Peloton and stick it out the window, or like none of that stuff worked for me. And I ended up getting a sewing machine and picking up that as a hobby, and a lot of people did as well. There were plenty of people sewing before, and I think it's had its ebbs and flows. You get on this whole thing, but I had already kind of been on a slow conscious lifestyle journey evolution over the past few years, where I'd stopped consuming so much fast fashion and consuming clothing in general, and being more mindful of my choices. And I was like, well, the next step in that is like figuring out how people do make these clothes.
Yes.
And I got a sewing machine and kind of took to it. And Instagram is where a lot of people kind of convene for online sewing nowadays.
Yes.
It used to be blogs, and I was in that community and I had set up a separate sewing account and space, and I was working on my business. I was doing all these things and I was like, oh, and I have this like nice creative outlet. And then Atlanta happened, which was it March of 2021. So that happened and it felt like the only corner of the internet that wasn't talking about it was sewing Instagram. And
Oh,
that really ticked me off. Like, I
yeah.
don't know if it was the fresh grief out of my dad passing or like, the state of the world at that point, like vaccines, no vaccines, I don't know what to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And, I was just like all sorts of worked up because everybody had commented on my sewing pictures. They're like, oh, that's so great. That's awesome. But it felt like nobody actually saw me for who I was and my
Mm,
identity and what I was bringing to that space. And at the same time, like there were and there still are a lot of people in the sewing space who just do a lot of cultural appropriation and just don't care. They don't care. They don't care that they're not making a kimono, but they're going to call it a kimono anyway. They
right.
don't they don't care they're going to send their kid to prom in a cheapo. Like they do all sorts of really bad stuff, and that's just like the two big Asian examples I can think of. East
Yeah.
Asian examples.
Yeah.
So many. And
Yeah.
so it was like a confluence of all those feelings. And I had started posting about it on my stories there, and I connected with some other bigger folks in the sewing space who had like tens of thousands of followers. And I had also been listening to sewing podcasts because what do you do when you're doing a hobby where you have to look at the thing? You can't watch Netflix. You
Yeah.
can only listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of podcasts, mostly run by like 2 or 3 white women
Yeah.
who were sewing and, great content. And one podcast called Black Women Stitch, run by Lisa Wolfork out of, she's down in Virginia.
Yeah.
And Black Women Stitch is the podcast where Black Lives Matter. And so she'd been doing the work, right, for almost a year before that. And her podcast is great. And she had created this space. She had clubhouse meetings. And I was like, man, we're all in her space, co-opting that space. And we have all these other problems to solve over here. And all this, what? I was like, we
Yeah.
should just have our own podcast.
Yeah.
Think let's just make our own space to have these voices and people heard within the community, because if you look around sewing Instagram, a lot of the people with the privilege to sew, like, and I will say sewing is a hobby that is a very expensive hobby and it is a privilege to do, right?
Mm,
Because it takes more time and more money to make a pair of pants than it does to go to Target and buy a pair,
yeah.
right? That, like, I was like, there's a lot of us out here that look like me and had similar experiences to me, that we should be talking about this, because we're seeing all these things and nobody's listening to us when it's just one or two of us. But if
Yeah.
we get together and form one voice and we address why, cultural appropriation leads to the massacre of women who look like my mom and other people's moms in Atlanta, then we can actually start having a dialogue. And
Yeah.
so I just put a call on the internet and
Just gave me
and
chills. No big deal. Keep going.
oh, like about a dozen people actually responded. They said, hey, I want to help you with this. I was like, let's just be clear. No one's getting paid for this. This is all our free time and energy. If we're cool with that, like,
Let's go.
let's go. Let's try it. And so I found a really great co-host, Nicole. She's based outside of Chicago. And we found a whole great team of people who stuck with us. I was like, what season are we on now? We are working on season 5 in our
Nice.
episodes, right? We
Ooh.
have guests on who either have a presence in the sewing community, like they are a influencer in it, they might have a business in it, they are somewhere from the Asian diaspora, so they might be in the US, they might be in Europe, they might be in Canada, Australia, all over the world, and they have a genuine interest in sharing their experience of being like however they identify within this broader internet sewing world.
Nice.
And then we also do deep dives on like cultural specific things like certain garments. So we did like a sari deep dive. We do
Ooh.
textiles, like a silk deep dive. And still the biggest one that we've done is the cultural appropriation one, where we have kindly explained it now, and we've gotten to the point where those episodes have been out for long enough where when people actually see it happening now on the internet, because it's still happening,
Oh yeah.
especially in sewing, they go, hey, that's not cool. I'm gonna be a productive ally. Did you know they made these 2 episodes about it already? You could just go listen to that and you'll understand why this is not cool and you should stop that.
Yeah.
And so it's become less like we have to do all the screaming and the work now,
Yeah.
which is amazing. And we've actually started dialogues and conversations with people who then can actually be effective allies and, you know, continue to do the work with us. But yeah, it's a really fun journey and has nothing else to do with anything else that I
I
do.
love it. Well, I think it does. I think there's just the through line of honoring what makes us who we are and the fabric of who we are. It feels like it's going back to the AID part, as you're talking about. It feels like it gives permission for the learning and the growth of the world around you evolving and changing, whether it be that it's actually evolving and changing, or your eyes are just opening up to the evolution and change that's been happening all along. And also, one of the things that I feel like is, maybe I like this because I feel like that's how I do things. So like, let me just acknowledge my bias and like, yeah, I love that. I'm like, oh wait, you do that shit too. Is that you're using this as an education vessel, but really an encouragement and a catalyst for conversation. Because
Yes.
I think that what we're at least coming from, there's a lot of pieces of this, at least, that are the reason I do this, is like, I grew up in a place that told me that I needed to be whiter than I was. I grew up in a school that told me I had to learn a specific way, even if I didn't. I then went into industry that told me I had to operate certain ways that didn't feel right to me, even if we weren't solving the problems and I had a solution. It was like, no, that's not how we do this. I also went into spaces and places that taught me that obedience was success and not actually innovation, right? That I was meant to be small. All these things that are really just counterintuitive to how you actually can be expansive and connective and solve problems. And so when you open a space that's like, I'm doing this from a place of curiosity. I'm not trying to dictate to you. I'm not trying to tell you that you're wrong and you're bad and whatever, but I will shine a light on what's broken. And I'm going to invite you into listening to it. And I hope that you will continue to have these conversations moving forward. I am not here to be insert me in whatever part that makes you feel uncomfortable and ease that for you. But please feel free to understand how this stuff is impacting not just you and your circle and center part of the internet, but how this influences the larger fabric of who we are as humans in this society. And so I just, as much as you're like, this is something separate, I feel like so much of what you're doing is intentional in a way that might not be like, oh, this was on my 5-year business plan, but like so much of showing up in authenticity, especially when you have gained a lot of these insights through turmoil and hardship and surviving really difficult things and realizing what really matters on the other side of things. Like, there is so much synergy in how you operate and show up that is, at least I believe, and I have witnessed many times over, attracts people that are either beginning that journey or recognizing game, and like,
Yeah.
all right, so we're cutting through the bullshit and we're going to really honor that. Like, sometimes we fuck up. Cool. You fuck up, I fuck up. Are we willing to acknowledge that and move forward and move towards healing? And so I feel like so much of this, even if it feels like, I don't know, I started doing this thing, I want to talk to people about it, we want to create a space, like, this is creating the world that we want to see. This is going back to that kind of inclusive, accessible way of moving forward. And so I just want to say, I see you. And I'm so freaking excited that the audience of Checkbox Other gets to meet you. What are the best ways, if you know, how would you recommend for people, aside from everybody go buy some stuff, go buy yourself some stuff? What would be the best ways for people to connect with you, follow you, get involved if they're interested in learning more?
Yeah, definitely follow the skincare brand. We're Chuan's Promise, CHUANS promise.com. That's also our Instagram handle, TikTok handle, Pinterest, all the things that you can find us on.
Nice.
I like to post behind the scenes stuff on stories and TikTok, and it's just kind of, those are like my little outlets. If you want the polished stuff, that's for the feed. And the website, sign up for the emails, or try to send. I don't spam because I was a marketer. I only send helpful stuff twice a month. So that's what I'm trying to build out there, like doing it in a way that is meaningful and actually helpful for people.
Yeah.
And then if you want to follow the podcast, it's Asian Sewist Collective, SEWIST is how you spell sewist, .com, or again on Instagram. Those are 2 main platforms right now. We've got about 46 episodes out so far.
Oh, nice.
A lot.
Yeah.
And we are working on some more for season 5. So that'll be live in the fall. And some of the topics, if you don't sew or aren't a DIYer, you're gonna be like, what the heck are they talking about? Because it might feel really technical to you. I definitely encourage you to explore fiber arts or that textiles and understand where your clothes came from. If you're like, I don't, what is this lady talking about? But if you're genuinely curious about the people who are in the space, we're doing all sorts of kind of creative things. We have a lot of great interviews that I think are really fun to listen to, even if you're like, have no context about the craft or the technical thing. Like maybe we'll inspire you to do one. And a lot of the times we talk to people who do things that are different from what we do creatively.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is at the end of the episodes, I'm like, now I gotta go try that new thing.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, oh, there's a lot of parts of what we just talked about that were really in common, even if we didn't speak the same language about it. Like, I get it. I get what you're talking about. And there are parts I don't get.
Yeah.
And so I think there's so much, truly, I feel like so much of your story as you've been talking about this stuff is how can we make it so we can find commonality, and that common, I would say common thread. Look at me, just like hitting right on that one. Didn't plan it at all. Well, let me say this. I am so grateful. We could keep talking for hours because, for all of you that don't know, I wrote Ada the longest thing of questions today because I was so excited to talk. So we touched on most of the things. But for those of you that want to hear more from her, please go follow in all the places. We will have a link directly to this stuff on the show notes. So please, if you didn't capture any of that live, go there, follow all the things. And if you want to just like let me know if you buy anything from Chuan's Promise and like how it goes. I'm nosy. I want to know. And
we've got a discount code too. I forgot.
Yeah, go tell.
It's Nikki 15 and you get 15% off.
Oh, well, come on now. So yeah, like if you're gonna put Nikki 15 on there, you're gonna just have to tell me what you buy because I want to be part of this skincare journey with. Oh, I'm so excited. All right. Thank you so much for joining today. And I'm just so grateful that our paths connected for this conversation and beyond.
This was so fun. It is like almost the end of the day, but I am so energized from this. So thank you for having me again. It was so special.
Oh, yay. My pleasure. I told you it was such a wonderful conversation. We chatted for a little bit afterwards. I wasn't kidding when I told you I had a gazillion questions for anybody that's looking on YouTube. There's like a lot of questions on here that we got to. And yes, as you listen to the podcast conversation, you hear that I set up the questions with a whole lot of reflection back to what they said and storytelling in the mix. As I write the questions, there's a lot of substance that I add to it too, to try to paint the picture of what I hope we'll be able to talk about and where we're heading. But the beauty of this podcast is that these are just used as like planting seeds of ideas, and the conversations and the questions that come about tend to be a lot more organic. So some of these things are in there, some of them aren't. And so we got to nerd out a little bit after the episode was over about just a whole lot of different things. Some of them that were questions and more about, what it is to run a business and to be really trying to create space for abundant, progressive, inclusive change. As we're in a world that doesn't always foster that for every one of us. So if you've listened to this and you haven't yet, please go to the show notes page, check out both Chuan's Promise and the Asian Sewist Collective podcast, and use that wonderful link. I didn't know it was a promo code. It's Nikki 15. And please, I wasn't kidding when I was saying this. If you buy something, let me know. I'm going to go buy some stuff right now and start my skincare journey as well. The little ritual we talked about. I could use a little bit of a ritual, and I don't think I have any masks in my life right now. So I think I'm going to do the mask one because that sounded wonderful. It reminded me of being younger and using a clay mask. I'm sure it wasn't anywhere near as wonderful as Ada's products are. But I'm excited to kind of channel my younger self into actually bringing some natural skincare routine into my daily rituals, my weekly rituals. And so if there's a way for us to kind of do that together, let me know. I'd love to know that I've got fellow clay mask friends as well in the mix. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. You're here at the end, so I'm assuming you did. I cannot wait to catch you on the next episode. If you have any topics or people that you'd like for us to feature, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can go to nikkiinnocent.com/podcast. And there we have a place for you to click a link called Join the Conversation. Let us know the people or the topics you'd like us to talk about. If that feels too complicated and you follow us on social, feel free to send us a direct message of any of the stuff that you are interested in hearing more about. If you have a chance, it'd be super, super helpful to spread the word about this podcast to people in your life. Use an episode, if it's this episode, as a starter point for conversation. But also before you finish your time on your device today, if you'd be willing in whatever podcast app you use to rate and review this podcast, it's super helpful for us. One, in being found on these podcast platforms. And if you have a review, you can definitely write that in there. It's super helpful for me to know how we can build this podcast even more in alignment with what you're coming here to listen to. And it also helps other people find us out on the internet. So we put a whole bunch of stuff out there, but your voice matters. You're the audience member who's actually listening to this, and somebody else listening, so they want to hear what you have to say. So your testimonials really do make an impact. Yeah, I think I had all the things. I am so grateful. And I didn't acknowledge this, but like I'm super sick right now. So if you listened to this like clogged version of myself this whole time, you're welcome and thank you. I'm almost done with this sickness. So I'm hoping for the next episode, it will be gone. Wildfires were a part of that, the smoke that we talked about in this episode. So I'm hoping that all of my body can clear all of this through. We got to create some other ritual of self-care to make all of this body feel taken care of and safe, secure, and healed. But that's my business, not yours. Don't worry about it. I will catch you on the next episode, and have a wonderful week ahead, my friends.